Okay, yes, volume 6. We're almost there. Just one more to go. I'm just going to dive right in because there's a lot going on in volume 6, even though it's one of the shorter of the volumes. And let me start with the end of volume 5, which I deliberately withheld from my previous video because it's sort of a surprise. So at the end of volume 5, Marcel is struggling with whether or not he should separate from Albertine or if he should marry her. And so at the very end, the problem is solved. She leaves him. So on the one hand, it was nice to have that problem resolved. But on the other hand, I was sort of taken aback because I thought, okay, what does this mean for volume 6? Why do I have the feeling that we're going to pay for this one way or another? And indeed, you do, because volume 6 is thick with, first, Marcel trying to come to terms with the fact that she's gone, trying to figure out what he can do to get her back, blah, 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 self-recrimination, self-examination, all of the above. And then it moves on from that to something else, which I'll get to in a moment. But I do want to share a comment from the translator. Of all people, the translator said of volume 6 that it is especially torturous. And I think he's right. The opening section, but which is probably almost a third of the book, it's just such heavy going that I came as close as I have come to abandoning the project. It was really tough to get through it. And so one day I said, enough is enough. And I closed the volume, put it aside. Now, I wasn't giving up on the project, but I was certainly giving up for the day. So next day, I pick up the book, go to where I had left off, and perhaps it's my innate sense of timing, I don't know, but in the next paragraph, you find out that Albertine has died. A real melodramatic flourish worthy of Pinheiro, and I'll get back into that in a second. But on the one hand, I say, okay, well, that solves some problems, but now what are we going to face in terms of him dealing with her death? And again, goes on and on and on, to a point where once again I'm getting ready to give up. But the one redeeming fact is that as he deals with his grief, he is slowly realizing that he's falling out of love with Albertine until it reaches a point where two important things happen. One is that his eye starts to wander and he starts looking at other women, and at one point he sees this one woman who really does attract him. He tries to find out who she is, fails, and then much later, he visits the Duchesse de Guermantes, and there is the woman. And she smiles at him. Turns out that the woman that he was attracted to was, in fact, his childhood sweetheart, Gilberte, who he didn't recognize, but she recognized him. And so that's why she smiled and she was reintroduced to him. The other thing that happens as he falls out of love with Albertine is that he reconnects with their mutual friend, André, and through André finds out more about Albertine than he ever had any clue about. And as I mentioned in my earlier videos, the whole idea of him making a prisoner of Albertine was to protect her from her lesbian impulses. And what he finds out from André is that it's not just a matter of impulses, that was in fact the major driving force of her sexuality, and that it created a lot of tension between her and Marcel because she didn't want to upset him, but at the same time she was having to suppress her interest. Okay, so once Marcel has more or less come to terms with Albertine's death, he starts to explore all these other options. And as I mentioned, he re-meets Gilberte. But what has happened in the meantime, she has a new name. She's now extremely wealthy. And so she's entered into society. And so one portion of the remainder of the book is talking about her exploits. And then the rest of the book is talking about a trip that Marcel and his mother take to Venice. At the end of the trip, his mother and he get in a train, go back to Paris. They're sitting in a compartment together. Each of them has gotten a letter just before they got on the train. And so they effectively open the letters at the same time. And turns out that his mother's letter is from a mutual acquaintance telling her about a society marriage. Marcel's letter is telling him that Gilberte and his childhood friend Robert de Saint-Loup are getting married. So everything's coming together, which is why I bring it up. Because what I find interesting about this, there's a continual tension in Remembrance of Things Past between, is this largely autobiographical, that's to say we're learning about what it was like for Proust to grow up, or is it more contrived than that? Volume 6 begins to look more and more contrived as all of these characters who have previously been somewhat diffuse are all kind of coming together. So that, for example, the marriage that his mother learns about is the marriage between the Baron de Charlus' adopted daughter, who is actually the physical niece of Jupien, the tailor that Charlus has been, shall we say, involved with. And he took the niece under his wing, gave her a false title, really. On the basis of that, she was able to meet and marry a marquis, so that she will now be entering society too. And then as far as Gilberte and Saint-Loup are concerned, they're more important. They're both, as people, they're both more important to Marcel, but their importance at this stage in the story is more or less to make him aware of how things are different from what he always imagined. So there's just one thing after another, one detail after another. It's all coming together, and it just feels a little contrived. It foregrounds this question of how much of this is autobiographical and how much of it is really invention. Which leads to my final point about Volume 6. If I were asked to describe what is meant by the word decadent, I would point people to Remembrance of Things Past. Not that the book is decadent, nor even that the decadence in the book is the kind of salacious notion of decadence equated with sexual immorality and so on. There's a lot of that in the book, but that's not the decadence. The decadence is the decay of a particular social environment that Proust has evoked brilliantly, but which is dying. And it's the death and the transformation that's occurring as a result of it that is the true decadence. Now, it's not really clear when these events take place, though the implication is it's roughly before the outbreak of the First World War. In any event, what you are seeing is the gradual transformation from an aristocratic society into what will be, for lack of a better term, called bourgeois or capitalist society, and that money has become all that much more important, and that the social graces and lineage that obsess the Guillemot and all the other nobles in the story just mean less and less, as it should. That's the interesting thing about it. So that on the one hand, yes, it's definitely a depiction of a society that's dying. In a sense, it deserves to die because it has lost any real sense of purpose beyond its own perpetuation. So on that somewhat gloomy note, I'm looking forward to Volume 7 because then, it'll be done. And then I'll be able to offer some kind of encompassing view, which will then move on into Pinter and his take on it. But, that's to come. Anyway, that's it for Volume 6. And thanks for listening. And I will talk to you later.